Welcome, Chef Megon Dee. Thank you for coming to Emerald Media to get interviewed.
Thank you for having me.
Do you mind giving us a little intro about yourself?
Well, as you know, my name is Megon Dee, and I currently reside in Portland, Oregon. I am pretty much multidisciplinary and all things related to cannabis, but what has really gotten my foot in the door was my culinary skills. So cooking with cannabis is what I'm known for. I've also created a company called the Oracle Wellness Co. That is it's a bit layered, but it incorporates products and education and consulting within the cannabis industry.
Well, I actually heard about you through the Oracle Wellness company, so I got a couple questions for you about that later. First and foremost, I just want to know, how did you get your start with cannabis? What got you into the industry? Why did you start cooking with cannabis?
I got my first break into cooking with cannabis. It was definitely a recreational experience for me. I owned a bakery in Baltimore, Maryland, and I had a client who was looking to medicate using cannabis with my baked products. It was a cupcake, to be specific. He was looking to alleviate depression and some pain, and then he was having some anxiety stuff flaring up. So he challenged me to cook with cannabis, essentially. I took the challenge, and he enjoyed himself. So I said, okay, I guess there's something to this. Shortly after, word of mouth started kind of taking over what I was doing, and I had this clientele growing for infused edibles, which was great. It created more income for myself because, with a regular bakery, a cupcake's $3. You got cannabis, we're looking at $6. So it's definitely something that helped me sustain my life as I was a new mom at the time. As far as how I got into the legal industry, well, once I realized that this plant was more than a recreational experience, but in fact was medicinal and has helped a lot of people, I said, okay, I want to understand more about what I'm doing, because there were times where I was getting people too high or not high enough when it came to infusing. So, there's a science behind this. And as far as on the East Coast, nobody was really talking about the science behind infusion. So I saw opportunity in Oregon, and Oregon has a long history of working with the plant. And they had some established companies coming up, in the industry. I said, okay, I'm gonna go to Oregon for cannabis. So I uprooted my family. We actually spent some time apart to make it work. About 6 months we were apart. And I literally started from the bottom ground, and I just kind of got lucky as far as landing my first job in a corporate cannabis company. And, I aided in building their product line, which eventually sold to a Canadian company for about $15 million. And shortly thereafter, they simply disposed of me. That was a little bit disheartening. And
corporate world, they're cold out there.
Oh yeah. This industry is it's many things. That's what we're fighting for today in this instance. We're holding these companies accountable for their actions of mistreating brown folk, especially in this space, because we have taken the most damage.
Why do you feel like there isn't that much science behind this industry, on the East Coast?
At the time, this was 4 years ago, there was minimal legalization.
It's still pretty minimal. So do you feel like it's the same way now, or do you think they've improved?
They've definitely improved. For me, it was about getting ahead of the game. I saw essentially, what was happening with cannabis, and my objective was to get ahead of the game, and that's what I did. So coming out to Oregon was the second state to legalize, I believe, in our nation. In California, Colorado, and Oregon. So the East Coast still had a lot of stigma. People were getting arrested out the wazoo. As far as businesses, being legal and creating products was non-existent. So I had to come to the West Coast if I wanted to be in this industry early in the game.
That's a smart move for sure. I mean, it's centralized on the West Coast, so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Is it still that way? I mean, you guys are coming along. You've come a long way, It's beautiful. It's beautiful to see. I grew up in Wilmington, Delaware, and I think it was about a year or two before Delaware got its first legal dispensary, but even then it was only medical, and they couldn't even have edibles, which a lot of states still are that way. They cannot have infused edible foods, Maryland, for instance.
No, I'm just waiting on like Jersey to make it completely legal, because I know right now they're still on like the medicinal legalization level.
Yeah, it's crazy. I could walk into a store here and leave with an ounce of weed and some edibles.
I went to LA last year, and it was like my first experience with it being completely legal, and it was just like really shocking. Like it was really shocking. What are some of your favorite strains? Like what that you've worked with at least?
I definitely like an uplifting terpene in my strains, so I'm typically searching for something that has limonene, because that's my favorite effect. So cookies and cream is one of my favorites. Blue Dream is also another one of my favorites. So here's the thing with strains, though. I can have the same strain. I can have 3 different Blue Dreams from 3 different growers and have 3 different effects, if that makes sense.
I've had white runs from 2 separate, growers, and way different effects. So I guess that's what. Yeah.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. Right. So again, that's tapping on the science of how this plant actually works. So I may try to go for something that's uplifting. It doesn't mean that's going to be my experience. There's a lot of factors that come into play about how you're going to feel. I tend to focus on terpene profiles because I know that'll definitely, guarantee a decent effect. Anything with limonene. Sunset Sherbet is another one. A White Widow. That was fun. Just a few.
Would you work more with sativa type of strains when it comes to like terpenes and stuff, since they're a little bit more on the citric side?
For personal use, yes. Yeah. If I'm creating a product, I have a formula that's for it's a sleeping aid, right? So I'm going to look at something that's more of an indica base. It has linalool terpenes in it, which is known to aid in helping you relax more. So, So it really depends on the effect I'm trying to create when I'm creating a product.
For your clients, like who do you recommend? I know you work with CBD. Do you also work with THC infused?
I do, yeah. That's where I started. I started with THC. CBD is what allows me to essentially make a living in what I do, because there's not as many restrictions or, being able to obtain certain licenses to work in the CBD, to work with CBD. So that's essentially why I focus on CBD, is to make a living. But THC is where I started, and it's definitely my preference. I think all of the cannabinoids are important. They actually work better in unison. As we learn more about these molecules and how they affect our bodies, we can make more conscious decisions about how we want to medicate and properly dose. So every person's different, when it comes to the endocannabinoid system. You can have a 10 milligram edible and your friend can have a 10 milligram edible. You will have 2 different experiences,
Are there certain kind of clients where you will recommend maybe you should just stick to CBD edibles as opposed to like ones that include all cannabinoids?
Definitely. It's more about ratios. I'll have a client come to me who has had a bad experience with too much THC. So I say, okay, well, your hyper fear is that you don't want to feel uncomfortable, right? If you get down to the root of it, what's happening? You had too much of something and you feel uncomfortable. So let's get you something that has higher CBD and much more less THC, and then the 2 combined will aid in you having a comfortable experience.
Do you think there are any strains that you recommend for like particular mental issues? Because I know that's one of the things you focus on.
That's a little bit touchy recommending, because I'm not a doctor by far. I can recommend the Doctor's Knox. I don't know if you've heard of that family, but it's a family out here in Oregon, and they focus specifically on, you know, like mental ailments and cannabinoids that'll help. You go through like an interview process, you know, because they want to know what you're currently taking, right? The medications you're currently taking and like your mental health history. So it's a whole intake situation. That's not typically my realm. So if someone's dealing with anxiety or depression or PTSD, then, you know, I would recommend CBD.
It's kind of like a ratio for you, like, you know, to lower the THC and higher CBD levels. So,
right.
Do you feel like, because I know when I started trying to take edibles, they would always ask me like, are you a heavy smoker? So for someone who is a heavy smoker, do you think that their ratios would remain low, if that makes sense? Like, you know what I mean? Like they should.
No. I think the only reason why they would ask you that question is to kind of gauge your tolerance. Someone who's a heavier smoker requires higher concentrates of, you know, THC or CBD to feel the effects. So that's what I'm saying. You know, two people can have a 10 milligram edible and have two different experiences. It's because our tolerance levels are different. Our endocannabinoid systems are different. So someone who's a heavy smoker ideally would require a higher percentage when it comes to THC.
I know, like, obviously there's been a lot going on in regards to George Floyd protests and Black Lives Matter movements and everything. So how has Oracle been handling that? How has the company been, I guess, showing their support in regards to what's been happening?
You know, I sat back for a while and I just kind of was kind of observing how things were kind of playing out, because this is not news for me. This is my everyday life, you know, and experiencing racism and prejudice, and even as far as my company's growth, is very real for me. You know, in 2015, you know, I was still in Baltimore, and I very much so was experiencing, you know, the Freddie Gray incident, if you are familiar with Freddie Gray. So, you know, right outside my window, I'm experiencing, you know, National Guard and armed soldiers with AR rifles, helicopters right outside my window. And that definitely created a level of PTSD for me. So fast forward to 2020, I'm living in Portland City, and, you know, there are no tanks outside my window this time. There are no AR rifles yet, you know, in my face. It's very real. As far as my company goes, you know, I'm very transparent about who I am, you know, as a Black woman in the cannabis space. And, you know, of course, Black Lives Matter. You know, I was at a point, though, over the past year, at a point to questioning myself if I should keep my face on my website. And that is because I had been banned by every major credit card processing company. So we're talking about PayPal, we're talking about Square, you know, anybody who accepts Visa, MasterCard. I had been banned from being able to make sales through my website for CBD. There were laws around CBD and banking that really hit the industry pretty hard. But I found it interesting that some companies still were able to process credit cards and make sales through their website. So I had to question if my brown face on my website made a difference in the decision making, you know, for me to have a legal CBD business. But yeah, you know, I'm all for the the rectifying of, you know, the wrongdoings when it comes to systemic oppression. And, you know, if I could be on the front lines again, I would, but I can't as a mom, you know. So I think my fight came out in a different way, and it was tapping into my original spirit, which is a creative person. So I've made public statements through art more recently when it has come to the whole situation. I'd be damned if I've sacrificed so much, you know, for my children to not be able to partake in this industry or this plant freely, you know. That's not how this is about to play out, at least not in my book. So I'm positioning myself to make sure that doesn't happen. And, you know, that required me to get into the game early, you know, to go into these rooms and I'm the only brown face, you know, even if it's just listening to what is being said in the brown rooms, you know, in these rooms where I am just one, you know, in a sea of whiteness, you know, just to know that I'm here. We do exist. There are brown folk in this industry. So we still have a lot of work to do.
I was just gonna ask you too, like, do you have any advice for women of color that are trying to enter the industry and who are just starting out and everything?
Absolutely, yeah. So I get asked a lot, how do I get into the industry? Well, one is education. I created a Canna Academy, and it touches on the history of cannabis, which is the very beginning. And, this plant's been around for centuries, but, you know, I start, and I acknowledge that, but I start where the criminalization of this plant really was implemented to take a hold of brown and black folk, you know. So I touch on that, and I go into the timeline of the laws that came into play to ensure that the whole culture of black and brown people became disenfranchised because of this plant. So education, right? Understanding the endocannabinoid system, understanding cannabinoids, understanding terpenes is a start. Secondly, a lot of us have skill sets that easily transfer over into the cannabis industry. And it just takes a little bit of tweaking, right? Because you have to learn the language. But if you're a graphic designer, there's space for you. If you can drive a car, there's space for you. If you can count money and management skills, there's a space for you. You know, cooking, you know, there's a space for you. Yes. So it's a growing industry, but there's definitely room for folks who want to be here. And I think it's important that they at least explore their options when it comes to a career path in this industry.
What are some hardships you have encountered, like some specific situations that you may have encountered? Like, as you said, you are usually one of the only black bodies that come into these spaces. So, like, just to learn off of those experiences, you know?
Yeah. So, and being the only brown face in those spaces, you become what's called hypervisual. Right? Hypervisual. And with that, people who are not used to you being in that environment, they want to try to connect with you. And they tend to do that by tapping into your culture, at least what they think is your culture. So, you know, there may be the switch up of how they would communicate with me as opposed to their peers or, you know, other people in that space. You know, hey, what's up, yo? You know, stuff like that. And I'm like, okay. How are you? So there's that. And then, you know, like I expressed to you earlier with the whole my first job in the corporate cannabis space, it was once again hypervisual. Like, I literally play back into my head this time where I was sitting having lunch with my coworkers, and they're telling the story of how one of them lives in a neighborhood and how they have an issue with one of the neighbors, and it's a black woman. And, you know, they're like, oh, she's so rowdy, we always have to call the cops on her, she's really a nuisance. And then the table got silent, and they all turned and looked at me as if I represented a whole race of people and why she was acting the way she did. And I was just like, okay. You know, so stuff like that, is unfortunately normal for a lot of us. And it's not just even in the cannabis space. It's all industries, I think, where we can experience this, you know? So racism is not a cannabis issue alone. It exists there, but this is a human race issue, you know? This is centuries in the making. This is a mental illness. This is psychological warfare that we're dealing with, spiritual warfare, if you want to go there, that we're dealing with. But with all that said, you know, I believe I went through those experiences to become the person I am today, you know, stepping into my purpose of helping others heal and see the truth of what this plant can do.
I saw on your page that like a few weeks ago you had posted about a scholarship the Oracle Wellness is having.
So I created a scholarship because a lot of times people are like, I can't afford it. Well, I want you to learn. You have to learn, right? If you want to grow, you're willing to grow, you're willing to take a chance in yourself in this industry, okay? I'll create the opportunity for you. So I had to pause handing out the scholarships, however, because I was about to do a fundraiser, a huge fundraiser, and then COVID hit. So right before COVID, I was planning this huge fundraiser to raise the funds, you know, to create about 10 scholarships. And then I couldn't host the event due to COVID. So it's still in my plans to continue to provide scholarships to folks. I'm just regrouping now. I'm working with a new platform that's going to be hosting my classes. Yeah, so I'm really excited about it, and I'm going to do a relaunch.
Yeah, it's a dope idea. I don't see a lot of people trying to provide the education. I was also going to ask you, like, where can you seek education, especially in states where it's illegal?
You know, that's why I created the Canna Academy. It's a virtual platform, so you can be anywhere in the world and learn about cannabis through this platform. Absolutely.
What was your first experience with edibles like?
I had a cookie a friend had given me, and I don't think I ate the whole cookie. I ate like half the cookie. I just kind of waited, and it was a body high. That's what I noticed immediately, because I was a smoker. That was my first experience with cannabis, was smoking it, you know, in a blunt. And, you know, that's a head high. So to eat it was a totally different experience. Like, body was feeling really relaxed. And also the duration of the high. Like, I was high for maybe like 6 hours, at least. At least a good 6 hours, right? Yeah. But that's because, you know, the way that the chemicals process through your body is different from inhalation, you know, as opposed to ingesting. You know, ingesting, it's gone through your bloodstream, and then your liver has to process it. So that's why it takes anywhere from, you know, 30 to 120 minutes for it to activate. So definitely a different high, but I enjoyed it. It was good.
Why edibles for you? And do you prefer cooking with sweets? I assume you do, because you're like a baker.
Baking is my background, yeah. What I've learned to do is infuse fats, because, you know, too much sugar is not good for me. Too many carbs are not good for me in my body type. So infusing fats allows me to easily infuse things that are more savory. I've narrowed down my sweetness to a tincture. So it's vegetable glycerin is the base, and agave, which have a low glycemic index. So, you know, that means it won't spike my blood sugar so high. But I like to use that as far as sugar goes if I'm adding it to like a drink per se, and I'll get my medicine that way. Infusing fats, I have olive oil and ghee butter, coconut oil. So depending on the dish, I'll infuse it based on that.
So would you say that like sweets are your favorite medium to cook with, as opposed to savory foods?
I think so, yeah. It really is a mood.
It is.
It's a mood. It's like, you know, do I want to medicate for dinner? Do I want to medicate in the morning, you know, to start my day? So for me, it's definitely just about of mood and what I'm looking to do that day. How I want to be more productive or relaxed that day.
That's all the questions I had for you today.
Okay. Well, it was a pleasure spending time with you. Thank you for reaching out to me.
Thank you
all right.
so much. I appreciate it.
Have a good day.
You too. Be safe. Bye.